right. Let's take you now to this court case. Judgment has been reserved in the DA's challenge of the Employment Equity Amendment Act. The party has argued that the legislation is discriminatory, unfair, and has a negative impact on hundreds of thousands of jobs. SABC News reporter Samkele Maseko is in Pretoria and joins us now live. Samkele, a very good afternoon to you. Of course, I saw you speaking to the DA's spokesperson earlier on ahead of this particular court case. Just speak to us in the main, what is the DA arguing, and of course, what transpired in court today?
Well, now to the Democratic Alliance is arguing that this particular Employment Equity Amendment Act is unconstitutional. The minister is being given draconian powers to basically implement a blanket approach across provinces, which are different, particularly saying that this particular act, particular subsection 15A, would be prejudiced against the colored community in the Western Cape, be prejudiced against the Indian community in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. But the ANC is watching these proceedings very closely. As we spoke to the DA earlier on, the ANC has sent its provincial coordinator of the provincial task team of the ANC in Gauteng. I almost said provincial secretary there, but Mr. Hope Papa, just the essence of this particular case, your GNU partner, this is a matter stemming from the 6th Parliament. They've now essentially taken it to court. Where do you stand as the ANC with the DA basically wanting to scrap this Employment Amendment Equity Act?
This gimmick by the DA, it's an affront and an assault and an insult to the majority of black people. By black people, I mean Africans, Indians, and Coloreds. Colored people and Indian people are not only found in the Western Cape and in KZN. They are found all over the country. The Act tries to deal with centuries, over 500 years of colonialism, and the crime of apartheid, which started in 1948, taking on from colonialism, to address the terrible labor market situation in South Africa, where the majority was deliberately denied participation, active participation in the economy. Now, over the last 30 years, there are employers in the private sector who deliberately ignored the law, hoping that they will pay fines, they will appeal. And that's why you find a situation where 8% of the population occupy the predominant positions in the labor market. You also found predominantly white-owned companies are actually the ones which are privileged to actually be active in the private space of the economy. And therefore, the amendment had to happen, having looked at what was happening in the last 30 years, to ensure that we build an economy which serves the majority of South African people. South African people, we talk about black and white, men and women, young and older people, people with disability. Many women have benefited from the Employment Equity Act. Many black people have benefited, but not enough, because 8% of the population still occupy huge amount of participation in the economy.
But the DA argues that this is an introduction of racial quotas. Their own advocate, particularly within this case, argued that this Employment Equity Amendment Act does introduce, retrospect, racial quotas in the country.
The Constitution says you must address the imbalances and atrocities of the past, the openings paragraph of the Constitution. How do you address the past injustices without addressing justice in the economy? Because the economy, land, those are main issues which guarantee stability of the country. And the African National Congress is very clear. We will address the past injustices and over 500 years of colonialism and the crime of apartheid through making our economy to serve the majority of South African people, public and the private. But at the moment, the biggest problems are in the private sector, including employers who deliberately were employing illegal foreign nationals in South Africa and not employing South Africans, and then cry unemployment in South Africa. How do you cry unemployment when you deliberately flout the Immigration Act of South Africa?
As the ANC, as you were seated listening to the arguments, and particularly the heads of argument that are represented by the representatives, the legal counsel and council of the Department of Labour and the Minister of Labour, were you particularly pleased by their arguments on how they affirmed such laws of Employment Equity Act to be that to assert affirmative action within the country, refuting allegations of racial quotas being introduced, and that subsection 15A of this particular amendment of the Employment Equity Act is in line with the constitution of the country, as opposed to the DA saying that it is against the constitution of the country?
We were impressed by the legal arguments of the Department of Labour and Employment because it asserts the opening paragraphs of the Constitution of the Republic, which says we must deal with the past injustices of our country. And we cannot deal with past injustices without addressing the social and economic problems affecting our country, particularly in the private sector, where progress has been very slow, unlike in the public sector, where women, black people, people with disability have actually progressed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hope Papa. I'm going to bring in the General Secretary of the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, just to essentially speak on this particular matter. Mr. Petto, just your standpoint as the Congress of the African Trade Unions, listening to the arguments here, were you impressed by the arguments by the Department of Labour, and do you see this particular court judgment being, this particular court case being successful in terms of the workers' perspective?
Well, thank you very much. We see the argument both from the Department of Employment, Labour and Parliament very successful. They made the argument that represent the interests of the workers, and we see the judgment will be the judgment that will be favoring the people of South Africa, in particular the working class. And we want to make it very clear that DA is a new liberal, a racist political party that has continued to challenge everything that is got to do with workers. You recall they challenged the NHI, they challenged the BELA, they marched to COSATU House last year, challenging the implementation, in fact, the increase of the national minimum wage. So we are very clear. We're very clear, and there's nothing wrong about the section 15 of the employment equity. There's nothing wrong. The minister has a responsibility to make sure that all companies or employers in South Africa comply with the legislation, and the portfolio committee plays an oversight role in making sure that the policies that have been accepted or approved by government is implemented.
The DA was arguing that Section 15A is inadvertently introducing racial quotas, particularly within the employment system of the country, and doing the adverse of redress and affirmative action. Do you subscribe to that particular view, and what is your perspective on that point? Well,
the argument, as I said, it doesn't carry water. And I think as the argument has been presented by the legal team of the Minister and Parliament, it is not the minister, she's not presenting a code, but that code will be addressed by a plan in terms of making sure that this is a plan. Have you achieved this one? Have you not achieved? And the Department of Labour or Employment of Labour, when they come to you, some as a company, they found that you are not complying. They don't give you a sanction immediately. What they give you a notice of 30 days. If you don't comply within that 30 days, obviously there is going to be an action. And what we have called the Department of Employment of Labour, that's why the minister has employed about 10,000 inspectorate. It's COSATU that went to the minister and say, we want an enforcement of all the legislation in this country.
When you look at some of the work that you do at NEDLEC, did some of these particular points come up when this bill was first presented? What are some of the points that you as COSATU presented in the process of consultations, and ultimately what were the discussions if it did go to the position of NEDLEC?
Well, this bill has went to NEDLEC. We have participated in NEDLEC. I'm not going to say everything, but there's only one challenge that we've raised which has not been finalized. But we said let's implement the legislation as we progress. We'll then be able to come back. The issue about readdressing the disabled people. It says 3%. Our argument was that 3% is not enough. We want more, so that because there's a challenge in terms of promoting or employing the disability workers or disability people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Solipeto. I was going to be cheeky there and ask you that, are you in favor of ANC or SACP in the 2021 local government elections? As you can see, the young ones Kamvelihle Koba and his crew as well. They are also here to support this particular bid of the Department of Labor to try and stop the DA from declaring this Employment Equity Amendment Act unconstitutional. The COSATU rather, and the ANC saying they're very pleased with the arguments that were presented by the representatives of the Department of Employment and Labor and Parliament within this particular court case that has been brought by the Democratic Alliance, which the judgment has effectively been reserved.
Samkele Moseko, thank you so much for that.